My mom, who I have decided is more compassionate than I, came down to the dock and saw his distress. She wavered in her decision to help or not, then jumped on a paddleboard after a few more minutes of him still being in the water without an apparent resolution. I half turned so I could see the event. "Can I help you?" my mom called out to him. "Nope, I think I can swim on a dock to this dock, and I'll have my son motor over, and I can get in from there." My mom continued to paddle towards him. I turned back around, quick to judge, thinking, "Oh boy, just another older guy who could probably use some help, but is too full of pride to accept it." Yikes. There was some banging around. Then I heard him ask my mom, "Is there anything I could pray for you? I'm a man of God and would be happy to pray for you." Right then and there, I was convicted of my own lukewarmness, convicted of the amount of people I had interacted with on a daily basis, yet hadn't told them who I was in action or in speech. I hadn't offered prayer to a stranger like this man had for a really long time. When my mom paddled back, she told me the details. He was a youth pastor at a local church. He had been homeless and a drug addict for a while. And when he had hit rock bottom, this man found the Lord. My mom and I agreed that not enough of us Christians behave in the way that this man had. Ironic, since the word Christian comes from the Greek word Christianos, which literally means follower of Christ. And what we follow the closest is what we become like the most. This is something I think a lot about. I was born and raised Christian in the Adventist community, and growing up in the church, it was always the people who had the craziest testimonies or life experiences before knowing Jesus that seemed to be the most on fire for him. I remember at a young age seeing a man who had had a history of addiction with his arms raised during a worship set in a room full of stiff bodies and asking God if he could give me that same experience, because I couldn't feel it, but I wanted to live boldly and know God's presence like him. Since that petition with God, I've come to the conclusion that we normally have to experience a deeper pain or discomfort that develops a need to rely on the Lord to experience a deeper level with God. But that's a sermon for another time. Maybe you're in the same boat as me. You were born into a Christian home, went to a private school from kindergarten to high school, and now you're here because it was the next step. You've heard a lot about that Jesus guy and how we're supposed to make it our goal to live like him, but it's just become insignificant, or you haven't been given practical advice. And if you're newer to this faith, that's okay too. You're still gonna hear a lot about Jesus here, how we should live like him, how we should love him and those he created, and maybe you'll wonder how we're supposed to do that too. This quarter, we're going to spend some time talking about what it means to live like Jesus. If you're sitting in this room, chances are you have probably questioned what God wants to do with your life. That question tends to get a little heavier when you reach college. Whether you're a freshman just starting out and possibly begging God to tell you which major to choose before you can drop classes for free, or a senior petitioning God to show you what to do with your major that you thought would be more useful than it turned out to be, it's hard to discern what to do next. The Bible does not even talk much about the future on a more personal level. And when it does, God is telling us not to be worried or that he has things under control. For example, Matthew 6:34 says, "Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." I would bet that this is not even close to the first time you have heard this verse, right? But what do we do with these texts in a society that expects us to not only plan for tomorrow, but for the next 5, 10, 30 years? I'd like to suggest that maybe God isn't concerned as much about the big choices that come with planning your future. Are there exceptions to every rule? Absolutely. But I want to tell you that as a Christian culture, we have come to the point of overcomplicating God's will. I'd like to propose that God is more concerned with who you are than what you do. Maybe instead of putting the pressure on choosing the right career, major, life partner, friend group, or place to live, we should be looking at who it is making us become more like. So instead of focusing on the big choices in front of us, what if God is calling us to pay attention to the small ones? As Ruby so beautifully read, Romans 12, 1-2 says, "So here's what I want you to do. God helping you take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't be so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings out the best in you." Notice that Paul doesn't say that the will of God is for us to choose the right career, to settle in a specific location, or marry a specific person. God's will for our lives involves the minute details of life, the everyday activities that we often don't even give thought to. And he calls us to do these ordinary moments counterculturally, which means living those moments with intentionality, because our primary calling is to live a life set apart, a life like the one Jesus lived. Before this summer, I was a declared health science pre-med major. Ever since I was a little girl, I've always had the dream of becoming a doctor. However, this summer, I was taking a time-consuming and challenging class, working an emotionally demanding job in healthcare, and balancing some personal struggles at the same time. Under this stress, I started noticing how differently I began to treat people around me. I felt like people were inconveniences. I wasn't willing to invest in them. If I had to listen for longer than a short time period, it didn't feel worth it. If I had to repeat something for the third time, I became cranky. I took shortcuts to get things done when I should have spent more time on them. You get the point. I was most definitely not living like Jesus. And then I realized that a lot of my path to achieving my goal would be spent this way. Healthcare is draining. My personal stuff probably won't resolve for a while. And academically, well, everyone knows how much of a grind med school is. And that's when I came to the conclusion that every little moment I spent pursuing my career goal would push me farther away from following Jesus more closely, from living like Christ. And so I let go of my dream. It wasn't easy. I definitely shed some tears over saying goodbye. But the Bible tells us that following Jesus isn't easy. And I got freedom and joy and peace back in return, just like Paul promises would happen in Romans 12. Now, don't get me wrong. I truly believe we need good and godly doctors. And if you are pre-med, I'm not at all condemning you. It is an important and self-sacrificial career. The beautiful thing about life is that each of us was created with unique capacities designed for different experiences and events. The reason why I share my experience is that if the things you are doing, the mundane steps to achieving whatever goal or plan you have, is not bringing you closer to Jesus, and following him closely is your priority, as I believe it should be for all Christians, then it may be worth reevaluating. Prior to this, I had been praying for God to point me in the right direction career-wise for a while. I fell into the same thinking patterns that a lot of us do with the pressure we face. I knew that I didn't want to become a doctor if it wasn't God's will, and I wanted God to tell me exactly if it was or was not his will. But it had to take me getting to the breaking point to understand that I still needed to give my plans over to him. Christian author Oswald Chambers says, God never crushes a will to the point of surrender. He never begs or pleads. He simply waits until we freely yield our will to him. This battle, once waged, never needs to be refought. Living like Jesus, following him requires self-awareness. And when we become self-aware of the little choices in our lives that are keeping us from living like him, we can surrender those to him. If you're praying the same prayer I was for so long, God may be waiting for you to become aware of the seconds, minutes, hours, or days gone by that conflict with Christ-like behavior. Proverbs 16:9 says, oh, it's dark. The heart of a man plans his ways, but the Lord establishes his steps. I can't help but think the wording here is intentional. As humans, we want to map out our entire lives, yet walking with the Lord requires seeing one step at a time revealed by him. There is more wisdom in texts like Matthew 6:34 that tell us not to worry than what appears at first. Because when you surrender your daily plans to the desire to live like Jesus, the Lord tends to guide the next step and the next step and the next. And if we remember that we are called to live a life that is not conformed to this world, then it's okay to not have your 5-year plan pinned down. In a culture that recognizes big achievements and milestones, living like Jesus involves being intentional, minute by minute. The question is not, what is God calling me to do with my life? It is, what is God calling me to do with the 5 minutes I have before class? Or, what does God want me to do with the time my roommate and I interact? Or, how does God call me to treat the people on the sidewalk on my way to class? Instead of, where do you want me to work? What if you asked, who do you want me to be when I'm at work? Or replace, who do you want me to marry with, how do you want me to treat the person I'm dating right now? Do you want to know God's will? Do you want to live like Jesus? You have to start with the small things today. When you're faithful with the small ones, God puts the puzzle pieces together to give you more to steward. Friend, stop overcomplicating God's will. While the world recognizes what you do, our Father applauds you for who you are.